Long before Europeans set sail, traders from Arabia, India and China already whispered about the distant change of islands at the edge of the world. Islands overflowing with treasures more valuable than gold. These islands had no name in Europe yet, but today we know them as Indonesia. From these islands came the rarest spices on earth, cloves, nutmeg and mace. Spices so powerful they changed the taste of food, the profit of kingdoms, the destiny of empires. Europe crafted them not just for flavor, but to preserve meat, to heal sickness, to show wealth and to survive winter. But Europe had a problem. They had no idea where Indonesia was. No map, no route, only rumors. So the world's greatest powers began the race, sailing into storms, crossing ocean and fighting rivals, just to reach the source of these Indonesian spices. And when the Dutch finally arrived, they didn't just buy spices, they seized the trade, conquered the islands and rewrote the history of Indonesia forever. Long before European explorers sailed the oceans, ancient civilizations were already using spices. Egyptians used cinnamon and cassia in embalming rituals. Indian traders used pepper and cloves as medicine and sacred offerings. And in the Middle East, spices were valued more than gold, believed to have healing and magical properties. But there is one problem: no one knew exactly where the finest spices came from. Spices were not just flavoring, they preserved food in hot climates. They were used as perfumes for royalty, as medicine for fevers and infections, and as incense in temples and rituals across Asia and Africa. Clove was said to cure toothaches, nutmeg could calm sickness, cinnamon was offered to kings and gods. These were no ordinary plants, they were symbols of life, purity and power. Arab traders were among the first to control the spice routes. They brought pepper, cinnamon, and cloves into the markets of Persia, Egypt, and Rome, while keeping the true source a secret. To protect their monopoly, they created myths, such as the spices grew in dragon-guarded valleys, and that cinnamon nuts were protected by giant birds. The truth was far simpler and far more hidden. All the words cloves, nutmeg and mace came from a small cluster of highlands in what is now eastern Indonesia, but no one in the West knew that yet. Everything changed in 1511 when the Portuguese conquered Malacca, the biggest trading port in Southeast Asia. There they captured Arab traders, Gujarat merchants, Japanese sailors, and Malay pilots. For the first time, the Portuguese questioned the merchants directly. Where did the cloves and nutmeg really come from? And under pressure, traders finally revealed the secret. They come from islands far to the east, the islands of Ternate, Tidore, and Banda. This was the first time the Portuguese heard the names of Maluku Islands, modern eastern Indonesia. The Portuguese didn't even know how to reach the islands, so they captured or hired a Malay pilot to guide Antonio de Abreu, Francisco Serrao, and Simão Afonso de Bisagudo. In 1512, their ships reached Banda, Ternate, and Tidore. This was the moment the Portuguese first set foot in what Europeans would call the Spice Islands. They were amazed. Nutmeg trees grew everywhere. Close forests spread across the islands, and the spices they searched for existed in abundance. After arriving in the Maluku Islands in 1512, the Portuguese obtained spices mainly through direct trade with local rulers, particularly in Ternate and Tidore. They exchanged textiles, metal goods, weapons, and silver for cloves, and relied on existing local system of cultivation and trade. To protect their commercial interest, the Portuguese built fortified trading posts such as Fort Castela and maintained a military presence. Over time, they began to pressure local rulers into exclusive trade agreements, attempting to control prices and restrict competition from other Asian traders. As Portuguese influence expanded, their methods became increasingly exploitative. They interfered in local political affairs, supported certain rulers over others, and used military intimidation to enforce unequal trade terms. Although they never fully controlled spice production or established plantation systems, local producers were often forced to sell spices at unfair prices while profits flowed to European markets. A strong resistance from local communities combined with limited Portuguese resources and the arrival of the Dutch in the early 17th century eventually led to the collapse of Portuguese control over the Indonesian spice trade. The Portuguese arrival in Indonesia marked the beginning of European involvement in the spice trade, but it wasn't the end of foreign expansion. Instead, it opened the door to a new and more powerful force. The Dutch replaced Portuguese influence, turning trade into control and commerce into colonization. What began with spices soon reshaped politics, economies, and societies. The Portuguese era ended, but the Dutch colonial period began, one that will deeply fracture Indonesia and leave lasting scar on its history. If you love to deep dive into history, don't forget to give me a like, subscribe, comment, and share to your friends. Thanks for watching.